John, how are you?
You know what? I could not be better. Thanks. I mean, it's a beautiful day in Arizona. What could be better than that?
On that note, you said it, you're in Scottsdale, and I just gave a Vistage presentation like literally this morning. And one of my friends is the members, and he's literally he dialed in from Scottsdale. He's like, "Hey Ryan, I'm not going to be at the presentation because I just don't want to be in Minnesota anymore." I'm like, "Well, I can't blame you." So you're the
Yeah,
smarter of the
yeah.
two of us. That's awesome. I'm very looking forward to this podcast because when your agent had reached out and was talking about getting you on the show, I looked at your background, and a lot of times you see doctors and business people sometimes are separate, and you are absolutely not that. You are completely both. You're an entrepreneur at heart, and you've done a lot of things over the years, John. So why don't you just give us the flyby for the listeners of some of the background, some of the highlights, and we can go back and kind of unpack like the parts of the journey and why you've been doing some of the things you've been doing.
Sure. So I went to college, undergrad at Drake, not just a little bit south of you in Des Moines, Iowa. Was a sociology criminology major, but knew I wanted to go to medical school. I'm the kind of guy who barely passed grade school, barely passed high school, and finally found my ability to study in college. Went to medical school in Chicago, then did an emergency medicine residency. Right after that, at a Southside hospital called Christ in Chicago, and it was a knife and gun club. Best 3 years ever as far as training goes. And thought I'd be an academician my whole life, but took a job in Arizona about a year later and as an ED medical director, emergency department medical director, and really just started noticing things of like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if we could just improve this, or wouldn't it be better if we did it things this way? Looking back, I kind of been an entrepreneur as a kid, but then I just started thinking, wow, it would really be interesting if we did X. And the first thing was an urgent care. And, urgent cares now are very passe, but in the early 90s, there weren't any. And so, really took that and ran with it and developed a company called NextCare. And for about 17 years, ran different emergency departments, practiced medicine full time, and then did the startup NextCare and grew that to about 100 million in revenue.
So the next year is 100 million in revenue. So because when I was reading some of your bios, I was thinking that the 60 locations, the urgent care that you built up was that, and so the startup ended up being 100 million, or were they both?
Yeah, so that was the startup was NextCare. It started off called Arizona Family and Urgent Care until I heard somebody answer the phone. Thank you for calling FUC. I'm like, ooh, that doesn't sound good. We better change the name. And so built that up over. Yeah, you can see where that went. Built that up over 17 years. Made every mistake in the book, and I'd always laugh. My only business course before that was typing in high school, which I nearly flunked. And so I went back and got an MBA at ASU, and really enjoyed the learning and really just dove into it. So being an emergency medicine physician, I can pick my own hours, so to speak. So I'd go to school on the weekends and I'd work during the week, and it just worked out well for my background, and I had a ton to learn, so it suited me well.
That's awesome. And what are the things that, because you've been involved in 15 different companies. So yeah, I was reading one of the books in the Real Man Plan, and you've been doing a lot. Yet you're also, I mean, the amount of time that you're spending in these different areas, you're obviously very efficient. So what are the other ventures that you're also involved in?
So I've been involved in a lot of small adventures along the way, everything from hot dog stands, and yeah, there's a whole story with the hot dog stands, to private autopsy. And I tried not to confuse the two, although sometimes it was difficult. So we did a private autopsy business way early where somebody could call up and say, hey, our loved one died. Can someone do an autopsy on them? And we'd send out a pathologist that day and do an autopsy. NextCare was, definitely a big one when I couldn't find a radiology provider to read all these films from these urgent cares all over the country. I started the teleradiology business in about 2000, gosh, I don't know, 5, 4, and sold that in about 2016, I think. And so a lot of the things I did were kind of very pragmatic in the sense that there's a kind of a method to the madness. Even the ones that were ridiculous and didn't work out, at least they were thought of with like, okay, this would be cool. We need to do this because nobody else is doing it. So I mean, I could go on and on with all the crazy dumb ideas I've had, but
Some of them have worked out. It's okay. You have enough.
a couple have worked out.
You have enough crazy ideas. All you need is one, man. You buy lots of lottery tickets. You
Right.
just need one. I'm excited to unpack this topic, John, with you because in the presentation I just gave, or the trainings that we do, it's this concept of knowing what you want from the business and why, and then growing value creates choices. And what I find Very interesting. My dad and I and our family business were the same way. Where like a lot of entrepreneurs start their business because they found a need, and then they wanted to fill the need because there was a passion or something that they were tied to it. And I can kind of feel that from you. And then like halfway through the journey, they're flying this plane. Like, where are we going to land this? Like, what is the ultimate goal for that? And I'm curious, like, where in that journey, you talk about the 17 years at the emergency care. Like, where did you start to realize that you had to think more, or not more, you had to think also about the machine of the business as well as what you were providing? Was there a transformation there that slowly started to kind of take place, or?
There was, that's a great question. There was, and it seemed to be very incremental. Like I realized that running one urgent care was pretty easy. I mean, it was hard because they'd never done it before, and it was a totally new venture, and there was no book on how to do it. But then three urgent cares, well, that's a lot different than one. And then 10 urgent cares was a lot different than three. And all these incremental steps, by the time we got to 60 urgent cares, there was really a machine and a process there that we had to build the infrastructure. And what I loved about that business is you mentioned efficient, and I'm one of those people who the way I think, for better or for worse, is efficient. Like I like going to the grocery store because I like to cook, but it's a game to me. Like how quickly can I get through the grocery store, getting everything I need and getting it out in the most efficient way possible? And that's kind of how I think. And so with NextCare, for example, it was a real process. So we did everything we could to make it as efficient for our providers, but more importantly for the patients as possible. So, what I've made the mistake of often is doing is basically we grow the business, then hire the staff, basically then staff it up. But what I try to do over the years is let's build this thing to handle 100 patients a day efficiently. And then when we're only at 60 or 50, we're screaming. And so that came to me, probably about the 10th urgent care, like, okay, this is good, but these are not one-offs. They have to be operated as a collective. And when I was over in Moscow, actually, and I went to the McDonald's over there, and I'm like, wow, it's the exact same McDonald's as the one in Chicago or the one in, Scottsdale, Arizona. How are they doing this? And I thought, well, if they can do it with McDonald's, I can do it with healthcare. So we started franchising urgent cares in 95. And no one had franchised healthcare until then. And there was a reason for that because it failed miserably. And I was a crappy franchisor, and we probably picked bad franchisees. Not bad franchisees, but franchisees who, after about 2 months, like, yeah, dude, I know more than you do. We don't need you anymore. And so, after a couple of years, we basically parted ways, and some of them stayed next cares, and part of them went off and did their own thing. And I'm still I'm close to all of them.
I don't know if you've heard of the book The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, but he actually brings up the story of McDonald's and how they were a real estate and investment company that happened to sell hamburgers. I don't know if that resonates with you at all.
It totally does. And because I read that book and I thought, I mean, it's totally true. I mean, they have great corner real estate. And in NextCare, this urgent care company, I kind of learned the hard way that we wanted to be on a corner that had a stoplight and good ingress and egress both ways. And I'm like, maybe we should turn this into a real estate company that happens to do urgent care. Now, we weren't well capitalized enough to have the real estate. I think I bought two of them and then leased them back. But that clearly would be cool if it worked, but it wasn't,
Mhm.
wasn't the model. We used our capital to grow centers, not buy real estate. So we leased all the buildings,
And
almost all.
well, but the concept is still relevant, right? Where I think what's so challenging sometimes for founders, even founders that grow very large successful companies that I've come across or been on the show, there's almost this transformation. I'm curious, going back to one of the questions, like when then slowly that happened, where like, hey, I'm solving this problem, but I have to get good at running this machine in order to keep making the impact and the scale that I want. And like, is that when you got your MBA that you started to have that transformation? Did you sell the business prior to getting your MBA, or like where did that timeline?
No, I it actually, so I started the business in 93 and my MBA was 93 to 95. And then went back to law school in 2003 to 2005. And then I was in the business until 2010. But, I kind of learned too in the business that I'm a startup guy, and I like change, and I like progress, and I like doing things differently. The day-to-day running of an existing business that's not metamorphosizing and not changing, adapting, that's not me. So what I learned with MeMD, which was a virtual medicine business, after about 7 years, I hired a CEO who was a great operator, day to day in the trenches, data driven, total rock star. And I like data, I like process, but that wasn't me.
Well, it's super interesting. So what process did you go through for data gathering or to make the decision of when and how to hire the CEO? And here's some of the question behind that, John, is when people think about hiring a CEO, I think a lot of people go, well, that would be awesome. A lot of times the ego gets in the way. A lot of time that, all the knowledge is in their head. And or the third part is they can't afford it because they can't maintain their lifestyle through the distributions. Therefore, they can't afford the payroll. So there's like a lot of these variables that I think a lot of people get stuck on how to figure out. When you went through that process, what was it like?
So the first one, let's talk about, because I think this is the big one. Let's talk about ego. What I learned, and I always tell the story. I literally grew up failing, and so I was never one of those fragile perfects who got knocked off the ledge and laid there. I would always like, so okay, get back up, because I was just so used to screwing this up, which was turned out to be a huge blessing, is particularly as an entrepreneur. And so if you can get out of your own head and get your humility gene up and your ego gene down, then all of a sudden you can realize, you may not be the best one to run this day to day. And there are some founders who are great operators. Bill Gates, for a long time was a great operator. Obviously, Steve Jobs, particularly during the
The second
Steve
round.
Jobs
Yeah.
reboot, his second round was a great operator. But then he basically was grooming Tim Cook for this. But I think the founder operators are rare that really can pull it off. Travis Kalanick, not so much.
Bezos
Um,
did an okay
the
job.
guy, yeah, Bezos an exception, certainly. But you know where I'm going, because I think if you really follow your passion and really can have a critical eye about what you're good at, and then get out of your own way. And if you're a great operator, great, stick with it. But I didn't think I was. If it was moving and changing, yep. But day to day, not me. So that part was easy. The money part actually was just kind of a time value of money equation, in the sense that I knew I could be better. I started another business, and I knew I'd be better off running this business and paying the gentleman I hired, even out of my own
Hmm.
pocket, and not taking a dime out of the business, because I knew it would grow better with him than with
Hmm.
me.
You mentioned a couple points of that you like startups, you like the metamorphosis and the evolution, and also that you're not a great operator. Those are very those are rolling off your tongue right now, John. I don't know if it was always that easy for you to be that self-aware of those circumstances, or was there certain things that you went through to be clear on how clear you are with those statements?
So in with NextCare, we went out and raised money in 2007, 2008, and we raised 50 million, 25 in debt from Goldman and 25 in equity. And when we were going through this process, a couple of the PE firms we looked at said, "Well, we're going to bring in our own CEO." I was like, "What are you talking about? Like, I was out of grad school, out of law school, a
Look at
practicing
me, right?
physician. Like, you're not going to find somebody more qualified to do what I'm doing than me. Literally, I'm not. I didn't think I was bragging. I just,
It's
I
a fact,
13
pragmatic
year
about
history
it.
at that point. Exactly. And I'm like, but I remember that sticking in the back of my head, and I kept thinking, maybe they're onto something. Maybe I'm not the guy to run this day to day. So the PE firm that we hired did not say that out of the gate. They were like, "Oh yeah, no, it's all good." And we had a president, and she was awesome. But after in that 2 years from 2008, and we closed our deal on the Friday before Lehman Brothers failed on Monday. I mean, literally skin of our teeth. And in that 2 years was a recession, and we just fought through everything. But I remember thinking that during those 2 years, like, yeah, this may not be for me. It's just, the fun kind of was gone.
Hmm.
And then I started thinking, and I know they were thinking the same thing. Maybe Shufeldt's great on the board, but as far as operating this stuff, as far as CEO goes, there's probably somebody better. And I don't know if who they hired, if they were better or not, but they certainly weren't any worse.
Again, that's very humble of yourself. It just takes a lot of mental hard work to hold all of these concepts at the same time in your head. Like, hey, I'm good at this. I did this, but then also need to step back to keep it moving forward. It's just I think it takes a hard time for someone, especially if they got a passion for why they started the business and the solution that they wanted to solve, making sure that they have the control over watching that come to fruition. Did you ever have any concerns that what you originally intended to do was at risk?
I think by the time with NextCare, by the time we brought private equity in, it was a lot of the processes were so well ensconced that it would be hard to change, and they changed some of them after I left, but they'd be hard to change. So I wasn't really worried about that. There's a business that I'm in now that I'd be a little worried it would change the culture. One of the things I've learned to do is really develop a culture from the ground up, because when I haven't, or when the culture's been, when there's been a chink in the armor, the place falls apart. And so I always worried. What I did worry about was they're going to lose the culture that we had. I mean, and I think they did a little bit, but part of that may have just simply been scale and
Mhm.
size, because now with NextCare's, 150 clinics.
So when I think about you scaling these companies and building the machine and having the kind of evolution of your mindset, then there's this other stage too, John, where people go, "What's this thing worth? What could I do with this?" And you kind of alluded to obviously the fact that you raised private equity firm came in and bought out the business, but what happened between where you kind of said, "Hey, what's this worth? How can I deal with this?" Especially in the medical world, which I think valuations are slightly different. I know that the private equity is on a rampage now with clinics and what they're doing with roll-ups, everything from eye care clinics to chiropractors to you name it. So like, especially for the physicians that are out there, like realizing it's not just a job, that this is an asset. We have a job that we get wages for, and there's an asset that we can have different things that we can do with. How did you come through that evolution and thinking about the company as an asset and exploring your options?
Well, it's funny. I really didn't, in the sense that this was always, I always go back and laugh. The reason I started the urgent care is so I didn't have these patients in the emergency department, because I like sick and dying patients. And that sounds screwed up, but I like patients who are really ill. But all these people are coming in like probably don't need to be spending $1,000 to see me and the hospital fee, when you can see it for $125 in an urgent care. And I didn't really think of it as a, hey, this is a great business. What can I get?
Mhm.
Take cash off the table. I didn't. My mind did not hit there probably until about 2008, when we were raising money. Like, wow, this business is actually kind of valuable. And because I thought I'll just be in this business forever, and I'll just start other businesses and hire people to do my job, and go on and do something else, which is kind of how the virtual medicine business started. So I'm not sure. I always counsel people now to think of the exit at the start, and I never did. And it's great advice. I just never followed it. Now starting the business, I start following it, but at the time I didn't think that
So
way.
I want to pull this thread because I think you're going to have some interesting insights on it, John. Is that so? Myself, been in the family businesses that I was in, and my company now is I again passion of a topic that I want to solve. Like we want to educate as many entrepreneurs as possible right now. Or before it was revolutionize business technology, whatever it is that a lot of entrepreneurs start, and then I like to call that kind of business like it's a lifestyle business. Even though we were doing 20 million, it's like it's how much money can we pull out of this business? It's an income, even though it's a salary plus distributions. It's really just a job with a lot of risk.
Right.
Never once did I go, hey, this thing's an asset that I might have other options to do with. And what's your here's the comment. Here's the comment that I want to hear your thoughts on is I believe that people can hold both of those in the same space to have the passion and the devotion to growing a business with care while also knowing that it's a valuable business and thinking with that exit, knowing that you're not selling your soul. Because I hear John over this last decade, it's like, oh, I'm never going to sell this because I would, that's sinning against my company. It's my baby and I'm never going to give it up. What do you say to people or yourself back in the day when you hear something like that?
What I would say is, I mean, if this is a business that's transferable, if you can pass it down to your children, great. Don't ever give it up. But you can't really. It's hard to practice. It's hard to pass a. It's called a PLLC, a professional limited liability company, and we turn into a C corp. It's hard. You can't really pass that to a non-physician child. And so, at some point, just pragmatism says, okay, well, how am I going to get rid of this thing? Even if you don't want to sell it, I mean, what are you going to do? It is an asset, and at some point, if you die with an intact, this has to go through probate. So, okay, be pragmatic. What can you do to move the thing onto someone else? And maybe you do an ESOP, an employee stock option. You sell to the employees. That's great, but you should have those. Like I said, you should have those thoughts early. To do it right, you want to set it up right early. So I wrote this book called Entrepreneurs RX, and part of the book is spend it, do what I didn't do, which is spend time at the outset and get all the ducks in a row right out of the gate. And then when the time comes, you'll have all this work already done in this thought process of how it's going to work before you even consider turning it over or selling it or exiting.
It's having options, right? And like, there's this whole
Yeah,
concept of like, if you think about real estate, you're not going to go put a bunch of money into a commercial building if you don't know that it's going to grow value or not, right? You think about like
right.
us as
Exactly.
entrepreneurs, we're investing all this time, money, and energy into our business, having no idea what it's doing on the
Yeah.
back end of that. And so crazy, John. I've had multiple physicians come through our training. One of them was had 50 employees, a couple physicians assistants, and then a bunch of, it was a total pyramid. And it's like, well, this company's only worth this much because what are you going to do with it? You know what I mean? You've been making enough income over the years to save for retirement, and I'm sure you get that kind of conversations, and you replace, the medical world, the healthcare world with any other business owner. It's the same concept. How do you get that concept through to physicians that they need to be working on the
Well,
business in that facet or in that kind of fashion?
well, it's first off, I can't tell you how many physicians I've talked to over the years who are my age or older who are like, I can't retire. I haven't saved any money. Dude, you're 60. I mean, how have you not saved money? I mean, I have people say, hey, can I get paid early this month because I'm not going to I'm not going to make some bills. And these are, EM physicians. And literally incredulous. Like, what, you've been working for 30 years in a really pretty well paying profession. Like, where's the money? And so I think a lot of physicians, well, I think a lot of
Business
people in
owners, yeah.
general, really business owners don't really have that plan ahead for the quote rainy day. And one of the reasons I went to law school was I saw people who were EM physicians who hurt their hand or their shoulder or their ankle and they couldn't practice emergency medicine anymore. Like, well, now what do you do? I mean, you're a one trick pony, Slick. I mean, yeah, you may be smart and you can do other stuff, but you can't do the same with the same income. And so for me, I thought, well, this would be good. I'll defend physicians in front of the medical board and help them with contract issues. I know how they think. And so I went to law school to do that, thinking, well, at some point, if I ever get injured or hurt and I can't practice emergency medicine, which hopefully I'll never stop, but at least I have a fallback position and I can practice law.
That's so funny that you say that because I think about that like when in our training we are talking about company specific risk, and it's a lot of times the owner's relationships or whatever it might be. But in the medical world, it's literally your hand or something that specific where if that's broken or messed up, like that's it.
Your
You
son.
totally got, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Same-
it's not just you showing
Yeah.
up; it's your hand too. It's so crazy.
Yeah, same with pilots. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the same thing. It's you might be great, but if you can't fly any longer, you're, going to be teaching, simulators someplace, which is okay. It's just your lifestyle is going to have to change. And so, I always kind of counsel and coach people to, have that fallback. And for me, I realized in emergency medicine, if I'm not working, I'm not making money. So what can I do to make money? I always say, what can I do to make money while I'm sleeping? Well, one was I'd start my own emergency medicine group. So other people were working and I'd get some small margin off there. Or I'd start an urgent care where it wasn't me seeing patients, I was just running the business. So that was kind of always my MO as far as what can I do to make money when I'm not actually, gloves on, hands bloody.
Isn't it so crazy? I mean, I talk to attorneys these days who make, $800 an hour and they don't like I mean, they're stuck. Like, yeah, you're making a bunch of money, but you literally can't think about anything besides exchanging time for for money. And it's like there's no way to get off of that hamster wheel once you start.
Yep, totally true.
In the medical world, John, I'm super curious because we don't spend a ton of time in our practice with our fractional CFO space. A lot working specifically with the medical world. Have some people that have gone through the trainings because it's agnostic for industries, but on the specific of the actual in the inner guts of the M&A, what's going on? What are you seeing as far as like how valuations like is it? There's a lot of private equity firms come into it. Or is it the medical groups going in and buying people? I've been watching multiples from the kind of the hearsay go up just like everything else, but what have you been seeing?
I think first off, I think it's going to start trending down. You're right. Last year and the year before, there was definitely a huge uptick. COVID certainly definitely hurt some businesses. A lot of medical businesses, it helped. We saw the valuations go up and the consolidation play. But we also saw a lot of people exiting. We always talk about the great exodus, the great resignation. And I think with a lot of healthcare providers who again were, north of 50, said, tapping out, I'm not going to work through this pandemic because it was a little rough for a period of time. And it was actually really rough for a lot of
Hmm.
folks a period of time. And so there was certainly the consolidation play in trying to get on a roll up, and people were getting multiples of, probably 6 to 8, 6 to 9 on EBITDA. If they were a digital business, they may have been getting 8 to 12 on revenue multiple. But I already see that starting to come down. If you look at Teladoc, where it was trading last year at this time versus now, I think it's about 50%
Hmm.
of their value
Hmm.
is evaporated.
So what is your passion that you, I mean, what gets you up and it gets you excited? Because in one of your bio lines it says you've never worked a day in your life, and I can relate because it's so fun. And when you're having fun, like, but what gets you up as it relates to business and medicine and like the change that you want to make?
So a long time ago, I was a resident, and I think this will answer your question. I took care of this guy who was probably 70-ish, and he was dying, and he knew he was dying. In fact, this was going to be his last day on earth. And I remember kind of studying his face, and he was conscious, and he had this look on his face, and I called it the if only look. And it was this look of this total dejected sadness
Mm.
look. And this may all be in my head and made up, but I just intuitively thought this guy is thinking of all his misses. He's thinking of all of his things he did not do that he should have or could have done and wished he had. And I thought, I will be damned if I'm laying on my deathbed with that look on my face. I heard this quote: the definition of hell is on your deathbed, you meet the person you could have become. That was that guy. And I thought, that ain't going to be me. So I'm going to be foot on the gas until I'm Pablo Picasso. The day before I die, I'm in my studio at 96 and drop dead. That's really what gets me up in the morning. And I mean, believe me, I have a lot of things just excite the crap out of me. I opened a venture capital firm and I'm excited to work with entrepreneurs. That's exciting. I love to fly. That definitely gets me up in the morning. So but it's really, the answer to your question is the first one.
How do you know whether you're on track or off track, or whether you're living in the flow or you need to course correct?
I think of the ease of which things seem to come to you. When that happens, I feel like, oh my gosh, I'm definitely in flow. It's like things, I'll be running or I'll be in the shower and someone will pop into my head and I'll be like, oh my God, this all makes sense. I've got it. And boom, boom, boom. Or all of a sudden you get, I always call putting on a new pair of glasses. All of a sudden you have this metaphorical glasses you're putting on and you see something like, Jesus was staring right in my face. How did I miss it? I think when you're in flow, I think those things just literally come to you. And when you're not, you're just scratching and clawing, and you're probably not in the right space, or something's not. There's something out of alignment.
So that out of alignment, that feeling that you're just kind of talking about, I think a lot of people that I've come across, tons and hundreds have been on this show where they get that feeling, but they didn't do all the prep work with their company, and then they're like, I want to pivot, and or some now all this makes sense, and I've been trying to scratch it. Now I want this, but I've got this entire business that I don't know what to do with, and now I don't know how to get out of it. Where in like the progression of your business did you go, I think it's time to sell, or it's time to start entertaining offers, or like where in a business cycle, and the couple big ones that you've exited, like where did that come to you, and how did you go about making that decision?
So I knew. So MeMD was a virtual medicine company we sold to Walmart in last June, and I realized that about 2018, 2019, that we were going to get outspent. That our competitors had raised in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and we had raised six. And we had a decent product. We had 60,000 visits a year. We're in all 50 states, but we were going to get crushed soon. And at that point, I had to hire the CEO, and I said, let's see what's out there. And then, we went through this process with one group. It didn't go anywhere. They were not the best investment bankers. Put a pause on it. Hired Wells Fargo, and they did a phenomenal job for us. And then COVID hit. And so with COVID, our volume was, chugging along, telemedicine was okay. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, telemedicine's a must have. Yes. And it just totally took off. And so during that process, we went through this process with Walmart, who was kind of late to the game. That we had, I think, three or four other groups that we were buying or that were buying to buy us. And then Walmart came along and said, "Look, we'll catch up," and they did.
So it was a market pressure. And was it in any of your other ventures? Has it been something where, like you had mentioned one when you had sold to the PE firm, it was, I'm not a good operator. Is there other things as far as like, I'm not having as much fun anymore, or I want to take chips off the table, or like what are other factors that you were weighing?
Well, I mean, and certainly with NextCare, there were some chips off the table at the time because I was we had very little outside capital in it. I triple mortgaged our house, and I was working tons of shifts in the emergency department to cover payroll for the urgent cares, and finally about 2005, 6, 7 after school, I was like, I need to slow down here a little bit and take a little bit off the table because it was highly leveraged and a lot of risk. And so that was a deciding factor for that. For other businesses, it just turned out to be, hey, I'm interested in this business. I'll make you an offer on it, and the offer was acceptable.
That's awesome. So I want to go into value creation and how you like multiple expansion. And I want to layer on a concept, John, before we kind of get into some of your potential examples. Is there's this concept that we like to bring up in our training of intrinsic financial value. Think about discounted cash flow, just purely based on the risk. Like it's an investor looking at an asset that says, what's the risk of this asset? We're going to place a value on it. Then there's what we call transaction or strategic value, which is you're going to get a premium because the strategic buyer is going to gobble you up, eliminate your competition, and they're going to pay a premium. But it always starts at that financial, somehow there's a baseline. When you look back at the different ventures or the different industry, different kind of versions of the healthcare industry that you've been in, what are things that you have seen that you go, that was so worth the investment and the effort because the value creation that it created on the back end was really worth it? Like, reoccurring revenue is the easy one, or client concentration that people talk about, but specifically from the spaces that you've been in, are there things that you've done that you go, totally worth it?
Yeah, well, some of them have been simply the smart choice about hiring the right people and making sure they fit our culture. So that's a gimme, and maybe or a give in. But some of the things that we've done, or some things we've really worked towards, is what can we do that's different and so forward leaning that it would be tough to replicate, and this will create intrinsic value. So one of them was, this was one of those flow moments. Never forget, sitting at a table eating dinner, and I thought of, a waiting room in a clinic is totally wasted space, right? There's no revenue produced in a waiting room. In fact, when people walk in the waiting room and they see it filled with patients, they're like, oh crap, I'm not going to wait. And they close the door and leave.
Revenue deterrent.
So yeah, it's totally deterrent. So we need to get rid of the waiting room. So I thought, wouldn't it be, and this is how I always start off these conversations, wouldn't it be cool? So wouldn't it be cool if you could have someone register and wait at home, and then you call them up 10 minutes before the room is ready in the clinic? And I said, yeah, wait at home. Wahoo. This would be cool. This is Wahoo, wait at home or office. And so we developed this process where people would go online and they would put in all this data, not only demographic data, but the stuff that they were, I'm coughing, I'm this, I'm that. And they'd fill out the whole first half of the encounter with all their historical data. Because as a provider, taking this data and type up totally wasted time, once the patient can do it at home, and you would just review and say, oh, let me ask you another question about that. Okay, great, got it. And so by the time the patients got into the clinic, because we would call them or we text them, you knew half their information. And then, so wouldn't it be cool if based on that information, we had a battery of tests that were appropriate that we could order? So if a woman said it burns when I urinate, okay, if they're between 13 and 50, we're going to get a pregnancy test on them and a UA on them, a urinalysis on them. Great. So by the time the provider got in the room, the x-rays would be done, the labs would be done, the history would be done, and the provider would do an exam and be like, okay, we're done. And so we really shortened the course of treatment down, took people out of the waiting room and put them right back in the exam room. So our waiting rooms were always empty, and then we started shrinking the waiting rooms. And so that was one of those processes where it just made total sense to me. And then we started dispensing medications from the urgent care, so they didn't have to go to Walgreens or CVS and wait for them. We just said, oh, here's your antibiotics.
So
we tried to make it a one-stop shop.
So interesting. One comment is your executives and your spouse must be like, when you're taking showers and running, you got ideas spewing out. I can relate. Another business idea. Let's do it, right?
Yeah. I've actually slowed down, and now I just don't tell people when I have them. But yeah, for a while I was like, "Hey, wouldn't it be great?" Like, no, God, no more, please.
John, just no more runs, John. Please just zip it.
Yeah.
So when you think it's super helpful now or example too, because those are things that make you, like you said, it builds intrinsic value. And like that was a great example, John, because if there's intrinsic value that makes the cash flow more sustainable, like that's your baseline multiple. And then the strategic valuation that might be higher is additive, right? Versus so many people, John, I don't know if you've come across this where like they're just banking on that strategic multiple without doing all the hard work. They're hoping that when they wake up and they're 60, that someone should just take this off their hands because of what they did. And I think what you are saying
Right.
is you're building that intrinsic value that helps. Anything else oh, I know what I was going to ask is you mentioned multiple times that you're a data guy. When you were managing it, and especially as you're scaling up to 60 locations and then adding all these other ventures on, you have to be looking at very high level KPIs that pyramid down, right? From a hierarchy. Like what were some of the data points that you were looking at where you could see the pulse of how all these things are working on the highest level?
So I went back and did a Six Sigma black belt at this ASU School of Engineering because I wanted to be able to extract. And so we had a pretty sophisticated electronic health record way early. So we started being able to pull data out of that, and we started doing something called the balanced scorecard. And we looked at by physician. So let's say 100 physicians. We looked at 17 data points of how they were practicing medicine. What patients thought of them, how patients ranked them, what their NPS scores were, what their average charge was. I mean, just literally 17 things. And every month we'd send this out to them, and it was not anonymized. They had their name on it, and then they'd be green, yellow, red. And so the top 30% would be green, next 30 yellow. You get the point. And so every month we'd have the scorecard, and people would be like, "Oh, crap, I'm low yellow, or I'm red." And so it was this constant march of
Hmm.
improvement that with the providers. And it wasn't about how much they billed. It was about a bunch of quality metrics and efficiency metrics, but then also the data capture. Did they document appropriately on the medical? Did they document appropriately on the medical record? And so that's how we use our data with this balanced scorecard. And I'm a firm believer in what gets measured gets managed. And so when I'd have these discussions with providers, it would always be, you know, totally understand, but let me show you the data. Let me show you your peer group.
Super, super cool. So some of these examples that you're talking about that build intrinsic value also make your organizations that you've built unique, which also probably make you proud. And where I'm going with this, John, is when someone goes to sell their business, I think there's the money aspect, which if people don't know how M&A works, the difference between a private equity firm, strategic buyer, or a strategic buyer that's backed by a PE firm, or however many Russian dolls you're going to stack on top of this, is trying to align what they want out of that business, like the Wahoo or like how you're managing your physicians is a special thing, right? And then when you sell, all of that could go and just be different or change. How did you align those type of things that you cared about or might have cared about with the money and the potential buyers?
So, for example, with Walmart, the thing that impressed me so much about Walmart. Now, I've probably been in a Walmart store 6 times in my life before we started interacting with them. There's just not one super close to me, and I just didn't go in Walmart. And so, I wasn't skeptical about interacting with them, but I didn't really have much knowledge base. But what I learned when I started interacting with them is these guys really care. I mean, they were super impressive, and they were humble as hell.
Hmm.
And so instantly I'm like, all right, they're going to be good stewards of this business. And what are they into it for? Well, they want to basically bring telehealth to all their communities and all these people, many of whom are in rural areas that don't have access to healthcare. I mean, and that literally, I live for this stuff. I work on the reservations all the time
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of, in the middle of nowhere. And so their values lined up with with my vision for this business had I had enough money to scale it like it should be scaled. And that really is what sold me with Walmart. And then I talked to the CEO of Walmart, this guy named John Furnow, who started off his career loading trucks at
Isn't
Walmart
that
when he was
cool?
16, and now he's the CEO of North America. And he was this totally normal, down to earth, great guy. And then his vision of where Walmart was going, I'm like, all right, I can get on board. And even though in a million years, if you would have asked me, is Walmart going to be a potential acquirer? I'd be like, Walmart? Of course not. But then you meet, Cheryl Pigas, who runs their healthcare division, and like, yeah, she's cool as hell.
Hmm.
And so that's really what sold it for me. And it wasn't even a close race because they were so far ahead of the curve as far as their vision of what they wanted to bring to healthcare in the United States. They trounced that. I mean, and it wasn't a money issue at all. It was like, nope, I can line up behind these people. They are rock stars.
That's super cool and a great example, John, because I think the one of things I wanted to highlight with this is a lot of times, like the concepts that I like to help people understand is if you grow a more valuable business that accomplish like the valuation, the financial valuation, you can get what you want. You could do an ESOP, you could argue to a PE firm that the discounted cash flow is it, and they can't beat you down anymore. But then there's the money aspect, but then there's what are you going to do with all of this that I created? That you can have complete misalignment on. I see it all day long. And what I want for people is to be able to have like five buyers against each other. And then there's the money, and then there's what they're going to do for it. And them to be able to articulate, I'm going to sell, let's say in this example, I'm going to sell to Walmart for this money, and I'm going to take 5 million less because of these reasons, but it's because of these reasons. And I'm willing to do that versus these people who might do this with it. And I'm not sure, and they're not good people. And I don't know if you came across that any of the, if you hadn't stumble into that kind of scenario, but I think so many times because people don't know how the M&A world works, they fixate on that purchase price, forgetting all of the stuff that's really important.
Yeah, I could not have said it better. The old saying is everybody's money is green. And I think at the end of the day, that what you just described is vastly more important. I mean, you have to at the end of the deal, you have to feel like you were paid a fair price.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things that no one's happy. You want to get more, they wanted to pay you less, but at the end of the day, you're able to look your investors in the eye and say, I did well by you. Not only did we create value for you for your investment, but you also get to be a legacy of this business that now is going to expand and do X. But you're right. If you buy it if you sell it to a firm that has really no interest and they don't care about what happens to the patients, all they care about is another roll up and then an exit in 2 years. Great, but what have you really accomplished? For us, for Walmart, Amazon was really promoting their telehealth capabilities. Walmart had to catch up to them in this, and now they've just totally blown by them.
Yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic because the moment you understand all this, in my belief, the moment you understand all this technical details, then you can actually spend time on the stuff we all care about, which is the emotions, right? It's like now we understand that we can push this over here so we can actually talk about the real stuff that we're all going to care about. And I think about especially in the physicians and the medical community. I mean, it's people's lives. They're touching patients that are truly changing people's lives. It's not like, oh, I just cleaned your house, right? I mean, like this, these are like very intimate services where who you sell to could really dramatically change other people's lives. How do you coach other physicians or other business owners that are physicians on how to think about these kind of things?
Well, first off, I kind of remind them why they went into medicine in the first place. And so, I always tell a story. If you're, you know, I get as much satisfaction in emergency medicine as saving somebody's life, which, you do occasionally, versus buying a homeless guy a pair of shoes. Because at the end of the day, you're helping somebody who may be having the worst day of their life. And even some small act of kindness makes a huge difference when you're down and getting kicked in the gutter. Somebody who helps you up, that's all it takes. And so if you remind people, like, why did you go into medicine in the first place? To help people, to be compassionate, to provide the best care possible. And then, okay, think about your business now. And if that's your business, who's going to be a good steward for that? You don't want somebody who's only interested in the bottom line. That doesn't work because at the end of the day, that fails. They have to be interested in the patient. And, our mantra, that I have a kind of a large staffing company now that we staff these providers all over the country. And our mantra is, look, I'll take great care of you, provider. You got to take great care of the patient. That's our promise to each other. My arms around you, your arms around the patient. And I think at the end of the day, if you put the patient first as a healthcare provider, you will always win. You'll always, not always, but the business has a
In
much better
general,
shot at
yeah.
working.
In general, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And are you familiar with conscious capitalism?
I probably understand the
Yeah,
phrase of
hopefully it's
blooming.
self-explanatory. And I
Yeah.
wasn't trying to get you or anything. I read this book, Conscious Capitalism, like 4 or 5 years ago, John, and my listeners probably get sick of me talking about it because like it's this book that essentially you can make a lot of money and do a lot of good if you're focused on all the stakeholders. So instead of the Milton Friedman shareholder at all costs, it's like, hey, they call it wind of the sixth power, where it's the community, it's the customers, it's the vendors, it's the shareholders. It's like, hey, there's a lot of people involved in this entire thing. We can also make money if we focus on growing value. The reason I bring this up and I'm curious because I can tell you got a huge heart and you want to make it work for everybody, specifically based on what you just said, is there's this thing that's been happening in the US. There's this book called Makers and Takers. They call it the financialization of America, where like it's just financial engineering like nonstop. And the healthcare world has specifically been victim to this. Every industry has. I mean, airlines have made more money hedging oil than they have seats over the last 10 years, just to give an example. In your space of healthcare, with what your mission is, seems like completely out of the norm compared to all of the financialization that's happening. How do you stay true to what you're trying to do of the good, and what's going on, and how can you maintain that?
For me, well, first off, I think if you approach things with a construct of gratitude, things life's a lot easier. So I always say every day I walk out of the emergency department, and I mean every day, I walk out on my own steam, breathe oxygen on my own, look at the sky, have a roof over my head. Compared to my patients, my worst day is probably 100 times better than their best day. So knowing that, like, gosh, how blessed and lucky am I? Okay, so you have that construct right away that you're grateful for things that good and bad, you're grateful for things that happen to you. And then you really focus on, I really believe if you take care of your people, of your employees, if it's a true culture of empathy and compassion, like you said, it wins. And does include your vendors. And then, of course, it includes the patients. They're at the epicenter of all this. This business NextCare, I remember we hired this guy, and we were probably 1,000 employees at this time. And so I tried to interview a lot of people. Tried to interview everybody at first, but now then a lot of people. And I
That's quite a
interviewed this
few.
guy, yeah, he was being hired for director of marketing. And I always ask, how do you improve yourself? What do you do to better yourself? What do you do to better others? And he had this blank look on his face. I said, okay, well, and I love to read. Last book you read? What was the last book you read? And he kind of goes, can't think of it. I said, we had to read a book. Like, he goes, well, yeah, in college. Yeah, it's like 40. You haven't read a book since college? No. All right. I mean, for me, that was the
Yeah.
end of the interview. So I'm back to the team and said, guys, I don't want to micromanage you. I would not hire this guy. But maybe you see something I don't, but my vote's no. Now, what I should have said is my vote's no. And sadly, today, I like everybody. And if I don't like you, you're probably a mass murderer. That's kind of how I think. So they hired the guy, and he literally was the proverbial one bad apple. He created so much problems. He was misogynistic and all that stuff. And he lasted longer than I did. And it took him about another year to get him out of there. But he was the one person who almost sunk the culture. And I'll never forget that lesson. You have to let the only people you should let in the family on the team are people who fit your culture.
Hmm.
And I think that's the best way to take care of each other, is to make sure everybody who gets in is really meant to do that work with this group of people.
It's so interesting because your examples and how much you cared about culture. I mean, I think about even the doctor's visits we've been having with my kids, I've had, I'm in and out of the doctors with my family members and stuff. And like when it's an anomaly that it was a good experience with a physician is a weird thing. It's just, and that's where I was going. Like you and your organizations must stick out, which means you have to be that much more intentional to protect what you build because of how much you could potentially be susceptible to like the standards, which are, the services and the standards are not as where they probably should be.
Well, and even if you don't think that way, okay, that's fine. But then there's a pragmatism as well. The physicians who get sued are the ones who they're pissing patients off. The patients perceive they don't care about them, they don't communicate well. And, knock on wood, I've never been sued. And it's not because I'm one of the Mayo brothers, just because I treat people kindly. I mean, I can almost, there was one guy that I could not, in 30 years, that I could not form a bond with. And he was a neo-Nazi with a swastika on his head and a swastika on his penis. I'm not kidding. Tattoo.
I'll give you that one.
And
That doesn't
and
count.
I'm like, wait, this is the one guy that I will not be able to have any sort of bond with because his construct and mine are diametrically opposed.
Oh, that's good. Like you said, if I like everybody, and if I don't like them, they're probably a mass murderer. There's a chance you were somewhat correct in that one.
Yeah, I think he could have been.
So as we're rounding the corner here, John, going back to you being in that bed and you not wanting to be the one that's regretting everything, like that story you told, what do you want everything to have unfolded? Like, what do you want to be thinking when you're sitting on your deathbed? Not to go too morbid, but I know you deal a lot with it. But I think there's a lot to be said about reversing back into your eulogy. I was told that at an early age, and it's just meant a lot to me. I'm curious on what your thoughts are.
So, there's this Hunter Thompson quote that I've always loved. It's life's, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's life's not meant to arrive at the grave in a well-preserved body, but to slide in sideways, totally worn out, covered with mud, yelling, "Holy shit, what a ride." And I want to be thinking of that quote with a smile on my face, thinking, you know what? I didn't leave any stone unturned. I did not waste, whatever you believe in, my God-given talents and providence and luck and love and everything else. I did not waste anything and not take anything for granted. And realistically, I can't say that now. I'll do my best, but I want to be able, at least on my deathbed, say that was a hell of a ride.
That's awesome. And I'm sideways, muddy, and bruised up, and it was worth it. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
John, this has
Every
been
day.
so much fun. I have two more questions for you. One is I want to know what your definition of intentional is, because it's the name of the show, and it's a word that we've gravitated a lot towards. So what does the word intentional mean for you?
It means projecting out into the future and building and then taking the steps and doing the work necessary to achieve the outcome that you've foreseen in the future. It means being pragmatic and realistic and optimistic, but all towards a goal of something you've seen in the future.
John, I can only imagine that all of the investors and executives and the people you've worked with in the past have enjoyed it a lot. I've enjoyed this conversation. And for the listeners that want to learn more about you, your books, your practice, where can everybody find you?
Go to johnshufeldtmd.com, or there's an Accelerant Ventures website that's just up. It's an Accelerant is XCELLARANT, accelerantventures.com. It's a new venture capital. We're doing health tech venture capital, so I'm really excited about that.
There's going to be definitely a market for that. I don't see that going away anytime soon. John, thanks so much for coming on the show. This has actually been just a ton of fun. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. I really enjoyed it. Great job.